Hi, Jane Schnupp here. Welcome to another of the new Savvy Sightseer video vacation series. Today we are going back to one of my favorite European destinations, England, but this time to the Northwest region. I had zipped through the area on a too brief 4-day swing through Great Britain a few years ago. It was enough, though, to whet my appetite to make sure I got back and spent some quality time exploring. Here you will find stunning contrasts. An old Roman outpost with quirky architecture in a little town called Chester, where you can take a walk on the largest remaining Roman wall and find the only house in town to escape the plague and learn a possible reason why. You'll stop in at Liverpool and learn some fascinating American history, as well as explore the birthplace of one of the most famous bands in the world, the Beatles. And then the pièce de résistance, jaw-dropping views of England's Lake District to see for yourself why poet William Wordsworth and children's author Beatrix Potter were so inspired by the lovely region. Like Peter Rabbit, let's not dawdle and set off to go hopping around the British countryside. We'll start our journey today in the town of Chester, which I used as my home base for venturing out to the other sites in England's northwestern region. It's about 170 miles north of London and is a very pretty little town. It is one of the United Kingdom's oldest cities, and at one point was a front-runner to be England's capital city instead of London. That was during the time it was a strategic Roman strongpoint, from the 1st through the 5th centuries AD. The Romans considered the port city a prime point for launching an attack on Ireland, and so Little Chester became a primary outpost of the Roman Empire. What really sets this town apart from others is its distinctive half-timbered old Tudor-style buildings called the Rose of Chester. Some of the original 13th century buildings have survived the ravages of time, but many of the impressive facades are really Victorian-era copies. The white statues set into the pillars of the old sweet shop are the Chester minstrels. When nearby Rhuddlan Castle was invaded by the Welsh and the Earl of Chester was under siege, the story goes that the constable couldn't round up their small standing army, who were off partying for midsummer. So he recruited the minstrels to get their instruments and make a huge racket. They were so loud, the Welsh envisioned a massive army approaching, and they fled. Today, the 1204 event is reenacted on a Saturday nearest to the feast day of St. John the Baptist in late June, and draws performers from around the country. The Rows of Chester are continuous half-timbered galleries reached by steps which form a second row of shops above those at street level. The rows are considered unique in the world, and nobody is quite sure why they were built in this way back in the late 13th century. What they do know is that one particular house has a unique history. Records show that when the plague swept the town of Chester in the 1600s, the only household in the town that survived completely intact was here, and it was full of garlic in the cellar. No one knows the correlation for sure, but in thanks for deliverance from the plague of 1647-48, God's providence is mine inheritance was inscribed on the frame, and in 1955 the house was added to the National Heritage List for England. This is the town from a different, elevated angle on its famed Roman wall ringing the city. Stretching over 2 miles, it is the most complete vestige of Roman walls still existing, albeit with some reconstruction done by the Normans. A walk on it gives striking views of the city and its many reminders that indeed this was one of the most important military bases in the Roman Empire, one that warranted the protection of a wall completely enclosing it. Strolling the walkway, you see reminders everywhere of a once vibrant Roman fort town. One structure you might not expect to see in the northern region of England is a Roman amphitheater. This one had seats for over 7,000 spectators and is the largest in the country. Only about half the arena has been excavated, and it's believed to date back as far as 280 AD. Chester created a public park around 1950 to display Roman artifacts unearthed at the end of the 19th century during excavations in the town. These include pieces from some of the most important military buildings, the Legion headquarters, and the main baths. Roman builders were ahead of their time with an ingenious underfloor heating system for its bathhouse, as explained by this obviously authentic Roman gladiator. For hundreds of years, Chester was the most important seaport in the Northwest, and so these towers were built to defend the port. A gate was an access point through the wall into the fortified city. This east gate wasn't added until Georgian times to allow the coaches to get through. In 1897, this turret clock was added to celebrate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. It was formally unveiled on May 27, 1899, Queen Victoria's 80th birthday. The beautifully ornate timepiece is the second most photographed clock in England, aside from Big Ben in London. Horse racing in Chester dates back to the 16th century, and Chester Racecourse, also known as the Rudy, is the oldest racecourse still in use in England. The first horse race here took place back in 1539. The River Dee starts in North Wales and flows through Chester on its 70-mile journey to Liverpool Bay and the Irish Sea. At one time, this 14th century bridge was the only one connecting Chester to Wales. Not everything is old in Chester. To celebrate a milestone in Chester's history in 1992, local artist Stephen Broadbent was commissioned to make these sculptures. The one on the left, in the cloister garden of the Chester Cathedral, depicts Jesus and the woman of Samaria sharing a bowl overflowing with water. On the right, the celebration of Chester, outside the Visitor Tourist Center, shows three large figurative shapes and reflects an aspect of the city's or the citizens' life and their interconnectivity. There's protection, industry, and Thanksgiving. Chester Cathedral is Northwest England's most popular tourist attraction. Originally founded as an abbey in 1092, Chester Cathedral is still a functioning church today. In 1403, the future English King Henry V ordered that the Welsh be limited in their access to the walled city. None could enter Chester before sunrise or stay after sunset on pain of decapitation. He established a curfew bell that would ring out every night at 8:45 p.m. from the cathedral to alert any Welsh in town to get out or risk being executed. Stories hold that some Chester residents turned the clocks to the wall so the Welsh wouldn't be able to see the hour, or they changed the time altogether to kind of get the Welsh. It was perfectly legal to shoot any Welshman in town after 9 p.m. with a bow and arrow. The bell still rings out every night. And an interesting point of fact, the law was never officially repealed. As beautiful as the church is inside and out, the real treat at Chester Cathedral is behind its walls. Inaccessible to the general public for over 1,000 years, the cathedral now welcomes visitors to explore its secret places. You can follow the steps of the monks from hundreds of years ago as they climbed up and down the narrow 216-step spiral stone staircase. Catwalks give visitors up-close looks at artistry usually too far away to take in the details, and lets people look at, not up at them, like this amazing stained glass window in the west nave. And to be able to appreciate the craftsmanship of the decorative west nave ceiling. And this stunning ceiling above the ladies' chapel, it was at one time completely black. A worker accidentally brushed up against it and was surprised when the black rubbed off and he realized there was a golden treasure below it. To show you better what I mean about a different perspective, look at this stained glass window, as you would typically when touring a church. Then notice the mini balcony just below the window. And this is the view of the same window from that catwalk right in front of it. Two views, one window, completely different. Absolutely, it was worth challenging my little fear of heights to get up there and see the exquisite artistry in such detail. And further challenging my height issues, I went up on the roof, but it was so worth it for a bird's eye view of the city and town hall. On a good day, Liverpool can be seen from the top of Chester Cathedral in the distance, about 25 miles north. Liverpool evolved from a small fishing village on the tidal banks of the River Mersey in northwest England. It is likely that its name evolved from the term Liverpool, meaning muddy pool or puddle. It started to gain recognition in 1207 when King John saw it as a prime jumping off port for keeping an eye on his interests in Ireland, and he granted it royal charter status. By the end of the 19th century, Liverpool had become one of the richest ports in the world and Britain's largest port outside of London. It connected trade routes around the globe, including India, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. By the way, the Stena boat that you see there is one of a few ferries that run between Liverpool and Ireland. They stop in at Belfast or Dublin. It's about an 8-hour trip. By World War II, Liverpool had become both a strategic port and an active manufacturing center, and so it became a prime target of the Luftwaffe. It was the second most bombed city in Britain. During a particularly devastating 8-day raid of May in 1941, the Merseyside was bombed almost every night. 1,900 people were killed, 1,450 were seriously wounded, and 70,000 were made homeless. This is just one aspect of local history that's detailed at the ultra-modern-looking white building on George's Pierhead. The Museum of Liverpool is the newest addition to the National Museum's Liverpool Group, and it opened in 2011. Blitzed Liverpool Lives is one of the newest exhibits and only opened in 2019. It combines the images of the bomb-ravaged city with oral interviews of personal experiences for a truly compelling program. The highly interactive museum covers multiple facets of Liverpool's history, including the first elevated electric railway in the world, which opened in 1893 and ran the 6.5 miles of Liverpool's dock area. Visitors can climb aboard the Liverpool Overhead Railway, one of the original cars and the only example of a motor coach to survive. And if that's not enough of a reason to visit this museum, it has another big draw. It claimed the title of the United Kingdom's Best Window with a View in a 2017 competition. The nearly 30-foot tall picture window's 90-foot wide span does frame an amazing look onto the city, taking in the River Mersey and the so-called Three Graces, 3 iconic buildings spanning more than 100 years of the city's history. Constructed between 1904 and 1907, the Port of Liverpool building, along with its dramatic sisters facing the waterfront, the Royal Liver Building, with a liverbird atop its clock, and the Cunard Building, formerly a cruise line headquarters, are known collectively as the Three Graces, after Greek mythology, for the goddesses of charm, beauty, and creativity. They're part of a UNESCO-designated World Heritage Site called Liverpool Maritime Mercantile City. Liverpool earned the honor in 2004 as a pioneer in the development of modern dock technology, transport systems, and port management. The Port of Liverpool building subsequently underwent a £10 million restoration from 2006 to 2009 and is now one of the most prestigious waterfront business addresses in the city. In 2008, Liverpool earned another distinction, European Capital of Culture, also recognizing it for its rich maritime history, creative culture and arts heritage, and this marked a sharp reversal in fortunes for the city. It had suffered a steep decline in the late 20th century, due in part to a countrywide recession. Since 2008, though, as a result of its Capital of Culture designation and the financial, cultural, and marketing support from the EU that it entailed, Liverpool has thrived. Abandoned warehouses and industrial spaces were replaced with commercial, social, and entertainment venues. Although it dates back to the 1960s, the Metropolitan Cathedral of Christ the King seems to fit right in with Liverpool's look to the future. Several attempts had been made to build a church on this spot, but nothing beyond a massive crypt built in 1928 was ever completed, given financing issues and wars. Then in 1960, 300 architects from throughout the world were invited to compete to design a cathedral for Liverpool that would incorporate the existing crypt, be completed within 5 years, cost at the current price no more than £1 million for its shell, and most important of all, it had to hold 2,000 people, all with clear sight lines of the high altar. No small order. A design by English architect, town planner, and landscape designer Sir Frederick Gibbard won the competition, and construction started in 1962. Gibbard met all the criteria, and 5 years later, the completed cathedral was consecrated. It's been affectionately nicknamed Paddy's Wigwam, likely due to the majority of parishioners being of Irish descent and the cathedral's conical shape, resembling a large teepee. Gibbard's unique design was highly innovative, and the circular plan put the altar at the middle of everything. It is the United Kingdom's largest Catholic place of worship and one of Liverpool's most instantly recognizable buildings. The 140-foot long crypt has become a popular venue for private corporate events and dinners for up to 300 people. Between the Metropolitan Church and the Port Building is one structure that has major significance to Americans, although few realize it. The last surrender of the American Civil War did not happen on U.S. soil. It happened here at Town Hall in Liverpool, England. The Confederate ship, the CSS Shenandoah, was originally built in the British town from which she set sail from the River Mersey for the Pacific in 1864 as part of the Confederate Navy. After months of wreaking havoc on whalers and raiding Union ships, the captain learned that the war was drawing to a close. The ship had been headed for San Francisco, tracking a ship carrying gold, when Captain Waddell and his crew encountered another Liverpool ship, the Barracuda, sailing out of San Francisco harbor. They were shown newspaper reports confirming the war was already over, and Waddell decided to hightail it out of U.S. waters where they could have been hanged for piracy. They sped for 3 months across 9,000 miles of sea to pull up to the Mersey River and its home port, accomplishing one more feat. It was the only Confederate ship to circumnavigate the globe. In Liverpool, Captain Waddell struck a deal of immunity for his crew, and on November 6, 1865, dressed in his gray Confederate uniform, walked into Liverpool Town Hall and formally surrendered, the last official act of the American Civil War. But of course, it is Liverpool's musical legacy that does attract most Americans to the port city. Several groups from what became known as the British Invasion launched their careers right here in Liverpool. Jerry and the Pacemakers, who had a hit with Ferry Across the Mersey, Billy J. Kramer and the Dakoters, and the Searchers, and, the most famous of them all, the Beatles. The so-called Fab Four called Liverpool home, and local spots of interest to John, Paul, Ringo, and George, or their songs, are the stuff of many tours. Penny Lane is an actual street with a shelter in the middle of a roundabout. There is a bandstand in the 235-acre Sefton Park, popular since the Victorian era. It is said to be the inspiration for the Beatles' song Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And you can visit the gravestone of N. Eleanor Rigby at St. Peter's Parish Church. Whether it was the real inspiration for their song by the same name is questionable, though. McCartney says he doesn't recall seeing the stone, and that he had wrestled for quite a while to find a good name for the lonely woman picking up rice after a wedding. He and John Lennon initially met at an event at the church in 1957, though, and it has been speculated that the name was tucked away somewhere in McCartney's subconscious. Still, the gravestone is a must-stop for some Beatles fans. Likewise, checking out the Cavern Club is on every Beatles tour. The group first performed there in 1961, initially with Pete Best, not Ringo Starr on the drums. Ringo didn't appear as the Beatles drummer there until 1962. Altogether, the group held about 300 performances in the famous warehouse cellar. Not to be forgotten are the homes of the megastars. McCartney and Lennon's are owned by the National Trust, but Starr's and Harrison's are privately owned. While Paul's house has a modest plaque identifying it, John's has the bright blue circle indicating that someone famous lived here that was installed by the National Heritage Organization. And Paul's okay with not having one on his old home. You see, you have to be dead for 20 years before that honor can be bestowed. To catch all four together again, then it's off to the Beatles Statue, which was installed on the Liverpool docks on Pier Head in 2015, the 50-year anniversary of the band's last gig played in Liverpool. The Cavern Club's owners wanted one place Beatles fans could gather in celebration of the band, and they donated what has now become the centerpiece of the city's most popular selfie spot. Sculptor Andrew Edwards incorporated some interesting features in the iconic tribute. Each band member has a small detail detail that's personal to his history. Paul McCartney carries a camera, a reference to his relationship with Linda Eastman, an American photographer and his first wife. John Lennon has two acorns in his hand, a symbol he and wife Yoko Ono equated with world peace. Ringo Starr has the number 8 printed on the sole of his boot, a reference to Liverpool 8, his childhood postcode in the town. And inside the belt of his coat, George Harrison's love of all things Hindu is reflected with some Sanskrit writing. While members of the Fab Four may have called themselves quarrymen at one time, none of them ever actually slaved away in a quarry. The northwest region of England, though, is loaded with quarry and mining sites. Once a major industry in the area had been slate mining. The last remaining operating slate mine is the Hunnister, 100 miles north of Liverpool in the Lake District. Slate had originally been quarried there perhaps as far back as the 11th century. As demand grew, the process turned over to mining to delve farther into the mountain. Churning out the celebrated, distinctive greenish-blue local slate that has been used to roof some of the country's best-known buildings went on for decades. In its heyday, Hunnister employed more than 100 miners, hacking out 3,000 tons of slate a year. Expansion continued well into the 20th century, until a gradual decline saw a complete closure in 1989. In a stunning turn of events, Mark Weir, a wealthy British entrepreneur, bought and restarted the mine's 11 miles of underground tunnels in the late 1990s. The same mine where his grandfather once worked as a cutter when the mine supplied slates to Buckingham Palace. Weir brought back the industrial tradition and revitalized an ancient craft, and the beautiful Westmoreland green slate is now handcrafted for high-end home units and accessories. He also added some modern activities at the mine. Tours will take you deep into the 380-foot cavern, or you could jaunt across the so-called Infinity Bridge, suspended 1,500 feet above the canyon floor. I get vertigo just looking at the photo, so for a more grounded time in the region, just driving through the Lake District is something to experience. It is doubtful a single region has inspired more poets, authors, artists, environmentalists, thrill seekers, and nature lovers than England's Lake District. Aesthetically unmatched, the more than 500,000 acres of the national park draw upwards of 17 million visitors a year. No pictures can do justice to its awesome scenery and cottage towns. English romantic poet William Wordsworth was so moved by the region, he called it the loveliest spot that man hath ever found. Evidence points to the district being an active place as far back as Neolithic times. Axes and other farm tools from the period have been discovered here among a mysterious group of standing stones called Castle Rig Stone Circle. The circle is almost 100 feet in diameter, with about 40 stones that were laid out very deliberately with an entrance configured on its north side. No one's quite sure of its significance. Some experts speculate it could have been a trading place or a center of religious worship for Neolithic people. Experts date it back as far as 5,000 years, from about the same era as the more famous Stonehenge farther south. One of the more unusual features of Castle Rig is a rectangle of standing stones within the circle. Personally, I think the tall one looks like it could have been a high priestess's seat. The Lake District was finally given World Heritage status by UNESCO in 2017 as a place of international importance. It joins other natural sites such as the Grand Canyon and the Rock of Gibraltar. Lake District authorities have been trying to obtain the UNESCO status since 1986. Drywall fences mark the countryside. These are remarkable structures. No mortar is used, just skill keep these walls intact. One of my absolute favorite Lake District towns is Grasmere. Most of the buildings date from only the 19th or 20th century, but the farms around Grasmere are much older. The church dates from the 13th century. Among its most famous residents, William Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy in the early 1800s. My first time here, I was still teaching English, and my main thought was, yeah, if I were surrounded by this beauty, I might be a prolific and successful writer too. I don't like to dine in when on vacation, so I found this spot in the town center for lunch al fresco. You just can't beat this view. One of the main tourist attractions in town is Dove Cottage, built in the early 17th century. For over 170 years, it was an inn called the Dove and Olive Bough. It closed in 1793, but in 1799, Wordsworth and his sister moved in. Like many buildings in the region, Dove Cottage is made from local stone with white lime-washed walls, and of course, Lake District slate was used for the roof, parts of the chimney, and floors. Visitors to the cottage can roam the rooms in the footsteps of famous writers. While most are mainly interested in sites like this, the sitting room where William wrote his poetry, few are aware that Dorothy was also a great writer. Her Grasmere journals, in which she descriptively wrote of their quiet existence at Dove Cottage and walking the hills of Grasmere, were never meant to be published, but became very popular reading when they were in 1897, some 40 years after she died. Dove Cottage was quite the hubbub of the 19th century literary set, and the Wordsworths entertained, among others, the Scottish poet Sir Walter Scott. Charles and Mary Lamb, another brother-sister writing team, known for the classic children's work Tales from Shakespeare, were often there, as was Robert Southey, named Poet Laureate in 1813 after Scott turned down the honor. He is perhaps best known as the author of the original version of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And even Samuel Taylor Coleridge was there. He was the author of The Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Kubla Khan. In a case of reality imitating art, the Friends of Grasmere Daffodil Garden opened in 2003. A piece of empty church land alongside the grave of William Wordsworth was turned into a wild daffodil garden as a tribute to the great poet and one of his most famous poems, Daffodils. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. A few miles south of Grasmere, after passing through a scenic countryside of mountains, lakes, and streams, is a part of the Lake District that was favored for another writer. Children's author Beatrix Potter was inspired by the area and set her adventures for Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny in the fields and gardens she so loved near Lake Windermere. At 10.5 miles long and 219 feet deep, Windermere is the largest natural lake in the district as well as all of England. What many people do not know about the famous lady is that she had another interest, pretty much as far removed from her whimsical children's stories as you can get. She was indeed multifaceted and talented, and she was an avid studier of mushrooms. She sketched volumes of them and wrote weighty dissertations on them. Given the constraints of her era and the limitations of women in science, her important thesis was presented in April 1897 to the elite all-male Linnean Society of London, not by her, but by a male botanist friend, George Massey. Potter dearly loved the Lake District and feared that development could ruin the area, which led her to become also a fierce conservationist. She used the profits from her popular stories to buy land, about 4,000 acres of countryside and farms, which she bequeathed to the National Trust for Preservation, as well as for a grazing ground for her beloved Herdwick sheep, the adorable lambs of which start out black and gradually change color to a lighter shade. I like to end all of my programs with the words of Dr. Seuss. Sometimes you don't appreciate the moment until it becomes a memory, and I like to add to that to always remember to celebrate the moments and treasure the memories. I hope you have enjoyed this trip to the northern part of England, and if you'd like to see more of the northwestern England, Great Britain, or any of my European destinations, go to my website. If you have any questions about this program, email me or use the contact page on my website. When libraries are again offering programs, you can check my programs tab to see where I'll be. Until then, visit the library site for more video vacations by Savvy Sightseer. Ta-ta for now.